Story number 1. She stood between the fuel pumps like a broken statue, motionless, staring straight through me, as if she'd been waiting for someone or something for a long, long time. The mountains weren't just silent that night. They were holding their breath. The gas station had no music, no hum of electricity, no voices, just a heavy, unnatural stillness that wrapped around our van like a second skin. When the rifle came out from behind the counter, I thought we were being robbed. I was wrong. We were being warned. You think you know the wilderness until it looks back at you. We hadn't planned to stop. We'd stocked up back in Buffalo, took pictures of a sky that shifted from violet to burnt orange in the blink of an eye. She wanted to chase the sunset. I wanted to chase the miles. But the tank ran low, and the next gas station lit up in the woods like a dying firefly. The gas station had no music, no hum of electricity, no voices, just a heavy, unnatural stillness that wrapped around our van like a second skin. We were somewhere deep in the folds of West Virginia. Roads had narrowed into veins of cracked asphalt. GPS had long stopped working. Even the stars above seemed nervous. My girlfriend joked about how it looked like a horror movie set, but her laughter didn't have much behind it. We both felt it, that itch in the spine that says something's not quite right. The station had a single flickering bulb above the door, a rusted ice machine, and pumps so old I wasn't sure they'd work. But they did. At least long enough for the woman to appear. She didn't walk up. She materialized. One moment I was alone. The next, she was behind me. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her presence sending an immediate chill down my spine. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her skin looked stretched too thin. Her hair was tangled with sticks and what looked like dried moss. She had this smell, earthy but not natural, like a cellar that had been sealed for too long. When I turned to address her, the gas station attendant's reaction would prove that something far more sinister was at play. The guy inside froze, then moved. Fast, he dropped behind the counter, came back up holding a rifle like he'd done this before. His face went from sleepy to stone-cold survival mode in seconds. He didn't point it at us. He pointed it at the woods. "Don't move," he said. "Don't talk to her. Get in your van. Lock the doors." I wanted to ask questions, but I didn't. We didn't wait. The woman didn't follow us, but she didn't disappear either. She stood under that flickering light, head tilted slightly as we backed out. I kept my eyes on her as long as I could until the trees swallowed the view behind us. We drove. No signal, no maps, just the dashboard clock ticking forward and trees pressing in from both sides like walls. Then came the tapping. At first, soft, then deliberate. We were at a pull-off point, a scenic overlook, though nothing was visible except fog. We'd pulled over to breathe, or to argue. I can't remember now, but I remember the tapping from the back window. I turned slowly, expecting her, but it wasn't her. It was two figures, barely visible, just shapes in the fog, tall, gaunt, watching. We sped off, tires screeching. I don't know how they found us, but they did. All night long, we'd catch glimpses, eyes in the forest, silhouettes in our rear view. Only a loaded handgun and nerves of steel would keep us safe from whatever predatory group was hunting us through the mountain wilderness. I had never believed in stories about mountain people, the kind who don't show up on maps. But that night made me a believer. We finally reached an open stretch, fields and fences, cows in the dark like motionless ghosts. We pulled into a diner that was still serving breakfast to truckers. Lights, noise, warmth, civilization. We stayed there till sunrise, waited till we could catch a ride into town, left the van in the parking lot. I still don't know if it ever made it out. The police said we were tired, likely imagining things. The attendant at the gas station? Gone. Station abandoned. No rifle. No record he ever worked there. My girlfriend left me 2 months later. Said she couldn't sleep when it rained, couldn't hear tapping without flinching. The mountains that were once a source of pride and comfort had revealed a darkness our narrator could never have imagined. I can't blame her. I still see those eyes when I close mine. Years passed. I went back once. Daylight, new rental car, camera mounted on the dash. I thought maybe I'd made it all up. Maybe I'd been tired, stressed, paranoid. But then I found the trailhead. It wasn't marked, but it was there, trampled, familiar, wrong. I walked 30 feet in and stopped. The air changed, the shadows thickened, and I heard breathing. Not mine, not an animal, slow, human, wet. I turned and left, never went back. This is more than just a story of survival. It's a warning about the hidden dangers that lurk in the most unexpected places. There are places in this world not meant for us. Roads that weren't built to be found. People who watch from the trees and wait for nightfall. You may think you're all alone out there, that what's wild stays in the forest. But I'm telling you, the mountains have their secrets, and some are better left undiscovered. Story number 2. I thought I was going into the woods to heal. I came back hollowed out, like something followed me home, but left my body behind. What do you do when you shine a light on someone and they don't react? Not flinch, not blink, not breathe. Just sit there, as if they were never alive to begin with. They say the Smokies are quiet, peaceful, but there's a silence in those woods that doesn't belong, the kind that presses down on you, like it's watching. She was right there, so close I could see the moss on her shoulders. Then she was gone, like mist, like memory, like a trick played by something older than fear. Some silences aren't meant to be broken. I learned that the hard way. And now, when the wind dies and the world holds its breath, I remember her. After the wreckage of a long-term relationship and a burnout that left me blinking under fluorescent lights, I needed out. Not a spa, not a bar crawl. I needed raw air, real dirt. I threw a tent, a knife, and a worn trail map in the back of my truck and pointed it toward the Smokies. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The plan was barely a plan. Pull off at a gravel turnout, hike a few miles deep past where tourists stop, sleep beside a creek, and disappear for a night. I wasn't running from anything. I just wanted stillness. I found a narrow trail west of Klingman's Dome. Branches clawed my sleeves, no footprints but mine. The deeper I went, the less it felt like walking into the woods and more like being allowed in. By late afternoon, I stumbled onto a clearing. The canopy was tight, the creek slow and dark. I pitched my tent beside the water, dipped my feet in, and let the cold bite through the stress. The trees formed a tight canopy overhead, and the water ran smooth over mossy rocks. I ate in silence. The dark came hard and fast. My headlamp barely pushed it back. But I wasn't scared, not yet. I laid in my sleeping bag, but sleep wouldn't come. It wasn't noise that kept me up. It was the lack of it. No rustle, no owl, not even wind, just nothing. Something in my chest clenched, not anxiety, something more primal, a prehistoric warning. And then I heard it, a cough, not an animal sound, not the forest shifting, but a distinctly human sound somewhere near the trail. I froze. There was no one else out here. I hadn't seen a soul all day. I unzipped my tent and stepped out, flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam landed on her, a figure, sitting at the edge of the creek. Her back was turned, but something was terribly wrong. Her long hair was tangled, her dress torn on the right side. She didn't move. She didn't react. My light stayed fixed on her, but her stillness was unnatural, like time refused to touch her. Then, in less time than it takes to blink, she was gone. I ran to where she had been. The mud was soft, freshly disturbed. Bare footprints led nowhere, no drag marks, no return path, just prints, then nothing. Searching the area revealed only bare footprints pressed into the damp earth. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I packed up before first light, heart rattling every time a branch shifted. What haunted me wasn't just her sudden vanishing. It was that she hadn't acknowledged me at all, like I wasn't there, or she wasn't, or neither of us truly were. I hiked out fast, the trail warping under my fear. Every turn of the path felt like she might be there again, this time facing me. When I finally reached a ranger station, my words tangled in my mouth. I knew how it sounded. A woman perfectly still, then suddenly gone, like a phantom of the mountains. Toads. The ranger didn't laugh. He didn't call me crazy. He just nodded slowly and said, "You're not the first." That sent a different kind of chill down my spine. He told me vague stories. Campers who fled without shoes, hikers who swore they saw someone in a white dress standing in the water. No one had ever been found. They called her the Creek Woman. Some said she drowned there. Others said she was never alive at all. It's been years, but the image is etched into me. Years later, the memory remains as vivid as the night it happened. I've returned to the mountain since, but never alone, never west of Klingman's Dome. I sometimes dream of her, not screaming, not chasing, just sitting, waiting. I have learned this. Not all wilderness is empty. Some silences are full, heavy with memory, soaked with stories too old for names. Was she a hallucination? A ghost haunting these ancient mountains? Or something else entirely? Yeah, maybe it doesn't matter. Because whatever she was, she changed me. Some places do that. Months after the encounter, I began to unravel. I wasn't sleeping. I kept hearing that same cough in my apartment, not loud, but deliberate, as if reminding me. I returned to the park twice with friends. We stayed near campsites, took safe trails. I said nothing. What could I say? But something gnawed at me. The need to know, to understand. So one spring, I went back, alone. I thought if I could retrace my steps exactly, I might find closure or confirmation that it really happened. Everything looked the same, except it didn't. The trail seemed shorter, tighter. The branches clawed deeper. The clearing was gone. Where the creek had been was now just stone. No water, no trace of current, no moss. The entire place felt evacuated. And yet, I found a boot print. Mine, still pressed into dry earth as if it had just been left, though months had passed. Impossible. Next to it, another print, barefoot, small, pointing toward the trees. That was when I heard it again. That same cough. This time, not ahead, but behind. I turned around slowly, expecting, hoping to see nothing. But she was there again. She hadn't aged, hadn't moved. Same hem hair, same dress, same posture. But this time, she was looking at me. Her eyes didn't blink. They didn't reflect the light. Just dark pits that pulled something out of me. Memories, warmth, tummy. I couldn't move. I couldn't even tremble. My body knew something my mind refused to admit. I wasn't in control anymore. She stood. I took a step back. My heels sank into the earth. The same muddy softness from last year. Now impossibly present in the dry season. She didn't speak. Her mouth didn't move. But I heard her voice anyway. Not with my ears, but inside. Why did you leave me? I turned and ran. But the forest didn't let me go. I ran for hours, but the trail looped on itself. Trees I'd marked passed again and again. My Jeepers showed no signal. My phone battery drained fast. And then it was just me and the dark. At some point, I collapsed, slept, dreamed. In the dream, she was beside me, not threatening, just there. She reached out and touched my chest. This is where the silence lives now, she whispered inside my skull. Oh, well, when I woke, I wasn't cold. I wasn't thirsty. I wasn't anything, just emptied. Eventually, I found a ranger cabin. A man inside stared as if he knew what I had seen. He gave me water, called me a medic. I lied and said I got lost. As I left, he said, "Some people, when they see her, never come back. You're one of the lucky ones. You walked away. I didn't feel lucky. I tried to leave her behind. I moved to a city with no trees, bought blackout curtains, kept noise on, podcasts, static, anything to drown the silence. It didn't work. The silence followed. It wasn't just quiet. It was her silence, the weight of her presence, like fog in my lungs. Every reflection seemed slower. Shadows lingered longer than they should. I started hearing stories online, message boards about hikers disappearing, dreams of a woman by a creek, people describing the same stillness. One post described her voice exactly as I'd heard it. This is where the silence lives now. That was when I knew she wasn't bound to the Smokies or the creek. She was bound to us, the ones who see her. What she gives, that silence, it infects. One night, I dreamt I was back at the creek. Except this time, I wasn't me. I was her. I was sitting, still, facing away, waiting for someone to find me. And I knew someday someone would. Story number 3. I never believed in generational curses until I stood barefoot on a freezing steel platform, staring into the void where my boots used to be. You know how people say, don't dig into the past if you can't handle the answers? I learned that lesson the hard way. What I found in my grandfather's journals didn't just disturb me, it followed me. The Appalachians are full of stories, witches in the hollers, lights in the woods, and voices echoing from empty valleys. But no one talks about the rich mountain tower. They pretend it's just another rusted watchtower, forgotten. Maybe for a reason. My grandfather never talked about his time manning the fire tower, and I never thought much of it until I opened a box of his things and found a journal with pages written in handwriting so frantic it barely looked human. I thought I was going up that mountain to honor a man I loved, but I left knowing fear he had buried. I left without my boots. I left with something I'll never be able to unsee, a tale that proves some secrets are better left buried in the shadows of the Appalachian Mountains. This is a story about a fire lookout tower, a grandfather's hidden journals, and an encounter that would challenge everything our narrator thought they knew about family history. After Grandpa died, nobody wanted to go through his stuff, not because they didn't care, but because he was the kind of man who carried his past like a loaded rifle, silent, dangerous, and not to be touched. The rest of the family was content to leave the attic sealed, but I wasn't. I waited over a year before I opened that musty trunk. Inside were Army medals, a pocket knife dulled from time, and a stack of journals wrapped in old flannel. I almost didn't read them. I wish I hadn't. Among the dusty boxes was a stack of old journals that had remained untouched, too painful to explore immediately after his grandfather's death. When they finally mustered the courage to read these journals, what they discovered changed everything. At first, the entries were what you'd expect, simple records of forest conditions, loneliness, reflections on nature. But then they changed. March 12th, 1979. Something walks the stairs at night, never reaches the hatch, just stops every time. I've counted 12 steps. March 14th. I no longer sleep. Every creak is a warning. I've started to hear it breathing. March 2nd. I feel something beneath the bed. Not just fear. Weight. Real weight. I didn't recognize the man who wrote these words. My grandfather wasn't afraid of bears or storms or war. Whatever happened up there had hollowed him. It took me weeks to plan the hike. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was scared, at least that's what I told myself, but because I knew how it sounded. Hey, I'm going to a haunted fire tower because my dead grandfather left spooky notes. The trail was long, wrapped in silence. Trees stood like old men, watching. When I reached the tower, the wind was sharp, but the air smelled of pine and rust. I climbed the staircase slowly, each step giving off a strange coldness. The tower was empty, still, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting. When they finally reached the tower, and found it empty, there was a sense of both relief and anticipation. They settled in, reading more of the grandfather's journals by headlamp, trying to understand the source of his terror. I read by lamplight until the wind howled against the glass. The first night, I heard a metal sound, something tapping the stairs. I wrote it off as weather. The second night, the silence became thick, like air turned to wool. I couldn't read anymore. Every page of Grandpa's journal started to blur. The third night, I fell asleep fully clothed, knife in hand. I woke up around 3 a.m. The hatch above the stairs, locked from inside, was cracked open, and it was cold. Not mountain cold, deep freezer cold. I saw frost on my breath, and then I looked up. Hanging from the ceiling of the fire lookout was a completely black figure. It had the shape of a person, but no discernible details. Just a pure black silhouette that vanished the moment they fully registered its presence. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound, but it watched me. I felt it, like ink poured into my lungs. Then it disappeared, not like it ran, like it was never there. I stumbled toward the hatch, heart rattling in my chest. I was ready to bolt, but something stopped me cold. My boots were gone, but the most chilling detail, the boots our narrator had carefully left outside the hatch were now completely gone, vanished without a trace, with no possible explanation. The hatch had been latched from the inside, and no animal could have moved so silently. I ran barefoot through the woods, cut and bleeding, until I reached the trailhead. I never went back. Since then, I've scoured old ranger logs, folklore sites, deep forums full of conspiracy theorists. Nothing. No matching stories. The Rich Mountain Tower is never mentioned. They've searched forums, old trail reports, ranger logs, and local message boards, but found nothing. Some say the mountain absorbs memories. Others think trauma echoes. I don't know. All I know is this. I saw it. My grandfather saw it. And I don't think it ever really left that tower. I think it's still there, waiting for someone else to remember. Story number 4. It started as a quiet escape. Just trees, solitude, and the promise of untouched wilderness. We thought we were alone. We weren't. There's a reason predators prefer the wild. Out here, there are no rules, no witnesses, just silence and the weak. What's worse than being hunted? Being hunted by someone who enjoys it, who plans it, who waits, just out of sight. In the dense fog of the pines, we found out how thin the line is between a hiking trail and a trap. This wasn't nature trying to kill us. This was something human, something worse. We weren't rookies. We had braved mountain storms, lost trails, and days without food. Ashley was our compass. Brooke kept us laughing. Me? I carried the pistol. Not for animals, mostly peace of mind. We passed only one other hiker who barely acknowledged their presence, adding to the sense of isolation that they had sought. That kind of silence out here is gold. The leaves whispered beneath our boots. We weren't in a rush. We felt safe. As darkness approached, their initial plan to stay at a trail shelter was quickly abandoned. 3 men already occupied the shelter, their intense, unsettling stares making the women immediately uncomfortable. There was something predatory in their stillness, like they'd been waiting. Brooke grabbed my arm. Ashley didn't say a word, just turned and walked. We kept moving off trail. No lights, no markers. Just instinct and unease guiding us. A clearing revealed itself behind a fallen pine. We set up camp there, hidden deep in the wild. We thought distance was enough. It wasn't. We cooked, told dumb stories. Ashley was quiet. She kept glancing toward the trees. We should have trusted her instincts sooner. I woke without knowing why. Around 3:00 p.m. Everything changed. Ashley's breathing was too sharp. Brooke's eyes were wide open. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Not the random sounds of wildlife, but deliberate human footsteps moving around their campsite. I didn't breathe. Just reached for the gun, unclipped the safety. I slid out of the tent low and slow, trying not to make a sound. And then I saw them. 4 silhouettes, just beyond the creek. 4 figures standing perfectly still, watching. One of them pulled something from his waist, a machete gleaming in the darkness. No movement, no words. Just watching. This was no random encounter. This was a calculated hunt. Do you know how terrifying it is to realize you're not being robbed, but observed like prey? Ashley didn't hesitate. She fired a single shot into the air. They didn't flinch, just turned and disappeared. That should have been the end. It wasn't. We didn't wait for dawn. We packed in seconds, abandoning the trail, moving straight through brush and trees. I led, Ashley behind, Brooke between us. Every branch was a trap. Every rustle was a chase. Our bodies paid the price. Skin torn, arms bleeding, shoes ruined. The next day, they continued, scratched, bleeding, barely eating. But we didn't stop. The woods were endless. And behind us, always behind us, we felt them. Sometimes I'd see a flash of jacket. Other times just the glint of something metallic. At one point, we stumbled into an old animal den, roots forming a hollow. We hid inside. Hours passed. No words, just survival. Brooke cried without sound. I almost fell asleep when Ashley nudged me. Someone was standing on the hill above us, just watching, not moving. Again, by luck or grace, we found a road. They flagged down a truck that they began to feel safe. The driver didn't ask questions. Maybe he saw the blood. Maybe he already knew. Later in town, we tried to explain. The cops said we panicked, said hunters sometimes get too close, said nothing really happened. In the weeks that followed, they learned that 2 solo hikers had gone missing in the same area. One left behind a journal. Last page read, "I think they're waiting for nightfall." Nothing connected, nothing proven, but we know that trail, those woods, someone's using it. Not to hike, not to camp, to hunt. There are places where humans disappear because the land swallows them. But this was different. This isn't just a story of a hiking trip gone wrong. It's a chilling testament to the predators that exist in the most isolated places. I see them in dreams now. Silent, still, watching. The Appalachian Trail, a symbol of natural beauty and adventure, revealed its darker side. What they want isn't money. It isn't even power. It's the scream that never comes, the chase that no one hears, the perfect crime where no one finds a body. We survived because Ashley didn't doubt her fear, because Brooke stayed quiet, because I had a gun and knew when not to use it. Most don't get that chance. Story number 5. Some places seem designed to keep secrets, not share them. And sometimes those secrets find you. I wasn't looking for trouble. All I wanted was an empty road and the solitude of midnight asphalt. But that stretch of West Virginia had different plans. No radio, no cell service, just miles of cold silence and the hum of tears on cracked pavement, until the night decided it wasn't going to stay quiet. When I stopped by the roadside, I thought the worst thing I'd face was the dark. I didn't expect the man with the rifle or what came after him. People say the Appalachian Mountains whisper to those who listen. That night, I learned they scream at those who don't. I had driven through some quiet places in my life, but nothing prepared me for that night. I wasn't looking for trouble. All I wanted was an empty road and the solitude of midnight asphalt. But this wasn't just any back road. It was one of those Appalachian routes where the GPS gives up. The stars feel closer than any town, and the forest seems to breathe just outside your window. There was no particular reason for my trip, no family emergency or grand adventure. I just needed distance from life, from noise, from everything. I chose this road because no one else would. No traffic, no lights, no interruptions, no radio, no cell service, just miles of cold silence and the hum of text on cracked pavement until the night decided it wasn't going to stay quiet. About 2 hours into the drive, something shifted. It wasn't anything visual, not at first. Just a feeling, like the car had entered a different kind of darkness. The trees looked denser, more watchful. The road narrowed, as if inviting trouble. When I saw the first glimmer through the woods, I nearly dismissed it. Just a flicker, a light like a flashlight beam cutting through the darkness for just a few seconds between the trees. It vanished as fast as it appeared. My gut clenched, but I kept driving. I pulled over when nature demanded it. Stupid, I know. No gas station, no rest stop. Just the woods, the gravel shoulder, and the illusion of privacy. I stepped out, keeping the car running, and that's when the forest came alive. From the edge of the trees, he emerged. In an instant, a man came screaming out of the shadows. No warning, no time to think. He moved fast and angry, like a cornered animal, his eyes wide and red-rimmed, teeth clenched, a long rifle pointed directly at their chest. I froze. He didn't ask. He ordered. "Let me in the car," he snarled, "or I'll take it and leave you in the dirt." I'm not a hero. I'm not trained for situations like that. So I nodded, hands up, and opened the door. He slid in beside me, weapon still aimed, every muscle in his body twitching like he'd explode at the slightest movement. I drove. For the longest 10 minutes of their life, the man kept the rifle trained on them. his gaze wild and bloodshot, more animal than human. That much was true. But what no one tells you is how quiet someone like that can be. He didn't talk. He barely breathed. He just stared, not at me, but into the mirrors, watching something behind us. "What are you running from?" I asked, not really expecting an answer. He flinched at the question, then said something that chilled me to my bones. "They're still out there." That's when we saw it, the setup. Their headlights revealed a chilling scene. A man lying apparently unconscious in the middle of the road with a car partially hidden in the forest. And just like that, instinct took over. I swerved. It was an obvious trap. I didn't need him to say it. I knew the second I saw that body that we were being pulled into something way worse than a robbery. As I veered, two figures burst from the tree line. One opened fire in their direction. My passenger shouted, not in fear, but like someone giving orders in a war zone. He pointed to a side trail, barely more than a mud path between the trees. I followed it. Branches clawed at the sides of the car as we plunged into the woods. I killed the headlights. My heart pounded in my ears, but I didn't speak. Neither did he. Neat. Then from behind us, the growl of an engine. Something big, heavy, and fast. A powerful vehicle roared past, searching for us just seconds too late. We sat in pitch-black silence. The only light, the faint glow from my dashboard. "What the hell is going on?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared into the dark, muttering something too low to hear. Nearly an hour later, the man told me to drive again. We followed back roads and logging trails until we emerged near a small town I'd never heard of. It barely had a gas station and a diner. He told me to stop at the corner and let him out. I asked again, "Who are they?" He stepped out, eyes never meeting mine. "You don't want to know," he said, and disappeared into the mist. He disappeared without looking back, leaving behind nothing but unanswered questions. I waited. I half expected the men from the forest to arrive, or the police, or something, but nothing came. So I left, shaking, confused, and forever changed. When our narrator finally contacted the police, they conducted a thorough investigation, but ultimately the case was closed with no further developments. I don't tell this story to scare people, but I've thought about it every day since. I retraced my route, searched news archives, even hired a local PI, but nothing turned up. It's like the road swallowed the whole thing. The most haunting part, the complete uncertainty. Who was the man? What was he running from? What was the true nature of the threat that pursued them through the dark Appalachian night? I believe some places are built on forgotten pain, the kind that festers in the soil and calls out to those who stray too close. I drove into that pain. I barely got out. The Appalachian Mountains hold secrets that some are willing to kill to protect, and some journeys are better left untaken. Some roads lead to adventure, others lead to nightmare. And in the depths of the Appalachian wilderness, those roads often look exactly the same. I have never driven through that part of West Virginia again, and I never will. Story number 6. Have you ever felt something watching you from beyond the trees, even when you're alone? I did, and it knew my name. We always believed the mountains were guardians, but I learned the hard way that guardians can turn, especially when disrespected. I used to think grief played tricks on the mind. That was before the forest started calling me in a dead man's voice. I didn't just hear Reggie's voice coming from the tree line. I felt him, or something pretending to be him. They warned us about the rules. I laughed. Now, I pray the thing in the woods forgets I exist. I was born and raised in Swords Creek, a place where the trees grow tall and secrets grow deeper. Folks around here don't talk much about the forest, but they all obey it. They won't say why. They just nod toward the woods and mutter things like, "Don't go past the line after dark," or "Never answer when the trees call your name." I never questioned it until Reggie died. He was my best friend since we were 6. A firecracker of a man with a reckless grin and a laugh that made you feel like you belonged. He was the kind of cow who'd sit in the face of tradition, joke about curses, and say things like, "Maybe the mountain needs a little shaking up." But the mountains don't like being joked about. Neither do the things inside them. Reggie's death was no mystery. A car accident, slick road, rain-soaked night. His funeral was simple, closed casket. I saw the body, or what was left of it, a year later. On the anniversary of his passing, James and I gathered on my back patio, nursing a bottle of whiskey and aching with the kind of sorrow that time doesn't heal. James was the quiet one of our trio, the peacemaker between Reggie's wild and my caution. That night, we drank until the bottle was dry, swapping stories and lies and laughing until the dark started whispering. It was subtle at first. My 2 cats, Midnight and Dusty, started pacing near the sliding glass door, tails puffed up, their eyes fixed on the woods like they were watching something move just beyond the light. I leaned in to whisper something to James when both cats let out a low meow. Not angry or scared, just wrong. These were cats that typically roamed during the day but never approached the windows at night. James didn't notice. He was staring at the tree line, squinting like he thought he saw something. "Hey," he said slowly. "Did you just hear?" "Yeah." I was already standing. "Sounded like..." "Don't say it," I snapped, because I heard it too. A voice, a man's voice, coming from the trees, and it said my name. I walked James home like I always did, just 7 minutes down the gravel road. But those 7 minutes? They broke a rule my grandfather once burned into my brain. Never walk alone past the tree line after dark, not even for someone you love. I used to think it was superstition, but that night I crossed a line I shouldn't have. On the way back, I noticed something unnatural. The crickets had gone quiet. The air felt still, like the world was holding its breath. And then, from somewhere deep in the woods, a whisper of my name came again, soft, sorrowful, and unmistakably Reggie's. "We don't need to understand everything," Grandpa used to say. "We just need to respect them." I took one step toward the trees, just one. I was drunk, grieving, and part of me wanted it to be true, wanted my friend back. But then my foot hit the dirt, and I remembered I saw the body. I carried the casket. Oh boy, this couldn't be Reggie. I turned and ran home, heart pounding, not from fear, but something deeper, something instinctual, primal. I slammed the door, locked it twice, pulled the curtains, and didn't sleep a minute. The next day, I chalked it up to whiskey and emotions. I told myself it was nothing. But the cats, they knew better. They refused to go near the windows after dark. Midnight wouldn't even sleep in the living room anymore, just hissed at the glass. That night, something knocked at the front door. Just once. Sharp, deliberate. When I looked, there was no one there, but the door was wide open. A door that had been locked, violated by something unseen. I checked my phone. A text from James. Still at work. You good? I stared at the open door, and I realized whatever had whispered to me in the trees wasn't finished. It had marked me, and it was waiting. The following nights blurred together in a haze of sleepless dread. I heard footsteps outside my bedroom window, leaves crunching, breath on the glass. But whenever I looked, nothing. No tracks, no breeze. And then the dreams began. Always the same. Reggie standing at the edge of the forest, hands outstretched, calling to me. His voice soft, desperate, almost kind. But his eyes, they weren't his. I tried to ignore it. I lit sage, hung crosses, sprinkled salt. Nothing worked. If anything, it made things worse. One morning, I found the salt circle in my bedroom broken, claw marks etched into the hardwood floor. I visited the old church at the end of the valley. Father Lewis refused to bless the house. "These hills got rules," he said, refusing to meet my eye. "You broke one. Now it's watching." I begged him, but he shook his head. Some debts can't be prayed away. That night, I made peace with something I never wanted to admit. The unspoken rules of the mountains had been broken, and now something was coming to collect its due. The last thing I remember before passing out was hearing Reggie's voice again, right outside my bedroom. "You promised, remember? You said you'd come with me." And in the shadow cast across the floor, I saw something lean, tall, and crooked step just beyond the window. I woke up to claw marks on the walls. Story number 7. You think you're alone until something proves you wrong in the worst way possible. Not every silence in the forest is peaceful. Some are the breath held before a scream. I went looking for solitude. What I found was something that had been waiting patiently. You don't realize you're being hunted until the signs become too deliberate to ignore. They say the wilderness clears your mind, but what if it also attracts what hides in ours? Trail running has always been more than just a sport for me. It's a way of escaping the noise of civilization, a method of finding clarity in the most isolated places. In those remote woods, I'm not trying to impress anyone. I don't have to pretend. Out there, I can finally breathe, I can exist. I had heard of the 100-mile wilderness from a fellow runner, stories of untouched terrain, no signal, no towns, no people. That was the point. It was meant to be a reset. I planned a 3-day run, just me, my gear, and the wild. The trip was supposed to be simple. 2 nights, 3 days of pure wilderness, packed with my GPS, enough food and water and a bear canister. I was prepared for anything, or so I thought. The trail felt strange from the start. Not hostile, just vacant. The trees didn't sway. The air didn't move. No wildlife, no other hikers, just absolute unbroken silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was wrong. I chalked it up to nerves and pressed on. The first strange detail was a folded candy wrapper, placed almost ceremoniously in the middle of the trail. I don't litter. I hadn't eaten anything wrapped. This thing was creased, folded like origami, and resting like it had had meaning. A marker, a message. I dismissed it. Maybe some other hiker had dropped it. Maybe it wasn't weird. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I didn't build a fire. I didn't want to draw attention. I remember wrapping myself in my bivy sack, listening. I don't know for what, but I was alert. Too alert. At some point, I realized I hadn't seen a single animal all day. Not a squirrel, not a bird, not even insects buzzing. The woods were holding their breath. By the second morning, the fear began to whisper more clearly. It started with boot prints, tracks that hadn't been there the day before. They weren't mine. I walked light, steady. These were heavy and uneven, like someone pacing or turning or losing their mind. They doubled back, circled trees, stamped erratic shapes into the moss. I followed them for a while, trying to understand the pattern. There wasn't one. It looked more like stalking. Someone walking ahead and then waiting, or walking behind me, close. A candy wrapper caught my attention. Not just any trash, but carefully folded with an almost deliberate precision that sent chills down my spine. It was sitting on top of a flat rock at eye level, not dropped, placed. Later that day, I stopped to drink from a stream crouching low. That's when I heard it. A breath. Human footsteps about 30 or 40 foot behind me, up on a ridge. I stood up fast, looked back. No one. Just trees. The endless green. I shouted something, anything. My voice cracked. The echo came back too fast. Nothing answered. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I didn't even sit. I stood behind a tree with my headlamp off, heart here hammering, watching the darkness for movement. Around 300, I heard movement. Not random forest sounds, but deliberate pacing just outside the firelight. Heavy breathing, as if someone was worked up, watching, waiting. Every instinct screamed at me to stay quiet, to not react. But my legs were twitching, ready to bolt. Then came the sound I'll never forget. A slow drag, like cloth brushing bark, then vigilance. When I finally dared to shine my light, there was nothing, just the candy wrapper sitting on top of my pack. It hadn't been there before. At dawn, I ran. I didn't pack properly. I just shoved everything into my bag and moved. The trail twisted like a snake, and I barely looked at my GPS. My legs were automatic. I needed to get out. I needed the noise of cars, of humans. That's when I saw him. A man appeared among the trees, scruffy beard, clothes that looked a decade old, standing perfectly still, watching. He didn't blink. He didn't move. He just stared. His hands were loose by his sides. Then, slowly, he raised at something metal. A gun. I didn't wait to see if it was real. I ran so hard my legs burned and my pack bounced against my back like dead weight. I didn't stop until I saw the ranger station. Inside, I must have looked like a lunatic. Sweaty, cat-eyed, breathless. I poured out the story. The man, the rappers, the breathing, the footsteps. At the ranger station, his report was met with polite but obvious disbelief. They said maybe I'd encountered a transient, an off-grid loner. It happens, they told me. People get paranoid out there. But the look one of them gave me said otherwise. He wasn't surprised. He was tired, like he'd heard this before. Back home, I tried to forget, but it didn't let me. Weeks later, I received a message online from a stranger. She had read a vague forum post I made, my way of processing. She asked if I had seen any papers. I said no. She had papers near her tent with children's names written over and over. She had burned them. Another hiker messaged me. He had heard someone following him, laughing under his breath. He never saw a face, but he knew someone was there. When he made noise, the forest grew silent. When he tried to sleep, someone scratched at his tent. It wasn't just me. Other hikers who had experienced similar encounters on that same stretch of trail. One described a man that stood behind a tree for hours, never moving, never speaking. Another woke up to find all her gear neatly rearranged in a ring around her tent. This wasn't a haunting. It was a presence. Something old, something broken, something human, perhaps once, but feral now. This is more than just a hiking horror story. It's evidence of something darker existing in the most isolated places of the Appalachian Trail. Something that stalks, that watches, that leaves deliberate signs of its presence. Some believe it's a legend, a ghost. I think it's a man, or was. But nature doesn't just strip away civilization. It strips away sanity. There's a reason locals warn about that stretch, a reason the rangers pretend not to believe, because believing means admitting it's real. Some trails are meant to be explored, some are meant to be avoided, and some hunters are not the kind you can see coming until it's too late. Story number 8. Some places are too old to forget you, even when you forget them. I left those mountains thinking they'd let me go. They didn't. I didn't return because I missed anything. I returned because I had to. The land didn't mourn my absence. It waited. That forest was more than trees. It was a presence. Not mystical, not magical. Something raw, breathing, ancient. Watching. The silence there didn't feel empty. It felt full, like someone else had already filled the air I was trying to breathe. What I saw on that trail never moved. That's why it terrified me, because anything that still can wait forever. There are places in this world that carry generational trauma, landscapes that remember long after humans have forgotten. I come from a stretch of land most maps get wrong. It's not just remote, it's unwanted. No neon signs, no fast food wrappers. Just green hills that hold secrets like scars under skin where I grew up. Time didn't pass. It sat still and stared. When my uncle passed, I was the only one left who could drive out and sort through what he left behind. No one volunteered to join me, not because they were busy. But we don't say scared in our family. We say tied up. I hadn't seen his house in years, but I still remembered the smell. Motor oil, mildew, and old sweat that never got washed out. The place sagged against the earth like it had been trying to sink into it. Inside, every inch was stuffed. Newspaper towers, radios from the 80s, boxes labeled "Don't touch." He couldn't stand the silence, I was told. I understood that better than I wanted to. The silence was the first warning. It wasn't just quiet. It was a silence that pressed into the eardrums, making you hear the blood in your own veins. He hadn't even left a note. Just a cabin full of junk and that feeling like you were being watched, even from inside. The next morning, I went walking, not to reminisce, to breathe. The cabin had grown too small, too heavy. I followed an old path behind the shed, one we used to take when we were kids looking for trouble. Only this time, I wasn't looking for anything. The trail had nearly vanished, swallowed by thorns and roots, but my feet knew the turns even when my eyes didn't. Higher up, I reached a place I'd forgotten, a cliff where the ridge drops off and the whole hollow spills beneath you like a broken bowl. That's where I saw it. Footprints in the soft leaf-covered dirt. Not fresh, but recent enough to hold their shape. They weren't mine. They came from deeper in, past where the trail ends. They led into thick underbrush no sane person would enter. I stood there for a long time, my ears tuned to nothing. And then I saw it. A shape between two trees. Something or someone was standing perfectly still, shadowed between two tree trunks where the light didn't quite reach. It didn't move, not a twitch, but I knew it saw me. It wasn't just watching, it was waiting, and somehow I knew it had always been there. I didn't shout, didn't run, not right away. What I felt wasn't fear, not at first. It was recognition, like I was looking at a relative no one ever talked about. It was a strange sense of recognition, something old, unsettling, yet weirdly comforting. Like this presence was familiar, something they had grown up with. I backed away slow. I didn't want to see it move. I didn't want proof it was real. When I made it back to the cabin, I locked the door like a child who thinks a latch can hold back the woods. That night, I didn't sleep. Just stared at the ceiling and remembered the stories our grandmother used to tell when the lights went out. The ones she always ended with. You don't need ghosts when you have the mountains. They'll eat you just the same. Years later, I asked my older brother if he ever saw anything like I had. He looked away, then said, "Grandma had a name for it. I forget what it was, but I knew he hadn't forgotten. Some things we inherit aren't in wills. They're in blood. The trail still shows up in my dreams. That clearing, that figure, it never moves, and I never wake before it steps closer. Some places don't let go. They wait. They remember, just like family. I moved far away, got a new life. But sometimes I wake up with the dirt under my nails, the smell of that forest in my nose. Sometimes I find leaves in my car, the kind that only grow in one hollow in West Virginia. Some presences are passed down through blood, waiting to be acknowledged. Some places don't let you leave. Some memories don't fade. I know now what that thing was, but it wasn't a ghost. It was the land, and it wanted me back. Story number 9. I've never believed in monsters. Not really. I believed in people who did horrible things, in wilderness accidents, in bad weather, yes, but not in anything supernatural. That changed forever during one solo hiking trip that began with a thirst for peace and ended with something I can barely explain. The forest was my place of renewal. I didn't go there to find myself. I already knew who I was. I went to forget the world for a while, to disappear among trees that asked no questions. But I wasn't the only one out there that weekend. Something else had been waiting, watching. What I saw, it still doesn't make sense. My brain says one thing, but my eyes saw another. I try to rationalize it, but the memory comes back sharp as a blade, a naked man running through the forest, eyes wide, limbs flailing. But it wasn't just that. It was the bones, the silence, the way the trees seemed to lean in closer that night. There was no phone signal, no way to scream for help. And the forest is a cruel place to feel fear. The deeper you go, the less you matter. The darker it gets, the more you hear. And that night, the woods were full of noise, not animal noise, not weather. Something else. Everyone loves to joke about true crime podcasts, about creepy Reddit threads, about serial killers lurking in national parks. I used to laugh too, but I don't laugh anymore. Because sometimes you don't stumble into horror stories. Sometimes they stumble into you. I'd hiked that part of the Appalachian Trail dozens of times before. The forest around Harper's Ferry had always felt like an old friend. Quiet, trustworthy. Even when the wind made the trees moan like the earth itself was hurting. This time, I wanted to try something different. No GP, no notifications, no plan, just 3 days alone. Early spring had always been a time of renewal for me, a nature lover from Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. To me, the real new year doesn't begin in January, but when everything starts growing, blooming, coming back to life. I set out on a Thursday morning with a full pack. A charged power bank I promised not to use, and my dog-eared trail map with 2 special spots circled in pencil. By the end of the second day, I reached one of them, a secluded clearing I had found 2 years ago, practically untouched. 2 open spaces separated by a small, still water pond, surrounded by shade and silence. No voices, no other tents, just the hiss of the wind threading through the pine. That night, I let a small campfire burn low and listened to frogs chirp across the pond. I read an old survivalist paperback and drank lukewarm coffee out of a metal cup. Sleep came fast, heavy. On the 3rd morning, I woke up early to gather wood. I left my tent and followed a dry stream bed a few yards from the pond, eyes scanning the forest floor. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a white rock under some moss, But as I brushed the leaves aside, I realized what I was holding. A skull badly decayed and covered in moss. A few feet ahead, a long bone that was unmistakably human, a tibia that sent chills down my spine. I dropped it immediately, backed up a few steps. My brain began to fight itself, rational thought versus panic. It could be old, could be a deer, but it wasn't. The shape, the teeth, the truth sat there, grinning at me. I stumbled back to camp, nauseated. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that I'd hike out in the morning and alert the authorities. But my mind wouldn't stop spinning. The night before, I'd watched some downloaded videos, local folklore, unsolved cases from this very region. Dumb mistake. I tried to laugh it off. I even said, "What are the odds?" aloud. But laughter sounded hollow in the woods. That night, everything changed. At first, it was just rustling, too slow and purposeful to be the wind. Then there were footsteps around 11 p.m. Movement in the bushes began to echo through the campsite. My fire was dying. I sat upright in the tent, holding my knife like it would matter. And then I heard the splashing, a violent thrashing from the direction of the pond. Something or someone was moving fast, crashing into the water like it was being chased. Or chasing. I stepped out of the tent, heart in my throat. That's when I saw him. In the pale moonlight, a completely naked man was running wildly through the trees. His body was covered in mud, arms flailing, eyes unfocused like prey in mid-flight. For a second, I thought he was coming toward me. I froze, but he sprinted past my camp, vanishing into the thickets behind my tent like a ghost with lungs. My legs finally moved. I checked my food bag, torn open, but not in the way bears do it. No claw marks, no slobber, no ripped tent, just shredded nylon and scattered granola. Just a deliberate, almost methodical destruction that suggested something far more sinister. That's when I decided to leave. I didn't even pack. Just jammed my essentials into the P and ran to the car. The drive back was a blur. I kept the radio off. Silence felt safer. I called the police when I got home. They sent a ranger to check the site. A report was filed about the bones, but I never got a call back. I stopped hiking after that. My gear stayed in the basement, collecting dust. Months passed. One night, unable to sleep, I scrolled Reddit and found a thread titled, "Bear Ate My Clothes. Had to run naked in the woods." The poster was a guy named Derek. His story? Uncanny. Same weekend, same pond. He'd gone swimming alone. A bear had come sniffing around and destroyed his pile of clothes on the bank. Panicked, he sprinted through the forest, completely naked, searching for help, then hiding until dawn. I messaged him. We confirmed the timeline. He had been the man I saw. What began as a terrifying encounter of potential murder and supernatural horror became an incredible story of misunderstanding. I never replied again. I didn't want closure. I wanted distance. Since then, I've often wondered how many horror stories are born this way. Not from ghosts, not from monsters, but from coincidence, fear, isolation. Our brains crave patterns. When confronted with chaos, we invent meaning. Sometimes the most horrifying monsters are the ones created by our own imagination, lurking in the spaces between what we see and what we think we know. The woods didn't lie to me. They only echoed what I already feared. Bones in the forest, a naked man in the dark, the unseen breath of something watching, all real, but none what they seemed. I still don't hike alone, not because of monsters, because of what I let myself believe. Story number 10. You think you're doing someone a favor. You think you're just offering a ride. But what if that favor becomes the very thing that haunts you forever? He wasn't bleeding. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even asking for help. He just stood there, still as stone, eyes hidden beneath his hood, as if waiting for someone foolish enough to stop. I've driven that road 1,000 times. I know every dip, every turn, every lonely mile. But I swear, I had never seen that man before. And somehow, he knew my name. They say monsters hide in the woods. But sometimes they hide in your passenger seat, staring straight ahead, breathing your air, riding silently toward God knows where. Some people vanish without a trace. Others leave behind dirt, a lie, and a story you can never quite finish telling. I was driving home through a patch of backcountry roads, mind running on autopilot, exhausted from another graveyard shift. The world felt stretched and silent. Trees pressed in and on either side of the narrow highway, their limbs skeletal and unmoving. My headlights caught the edge of the pavement, and then something else. Someone. At first, I thought it was a deer. But as I drew closer, I realized it was a young man. Hoodie pulled up, hands stuffed in his pockets, face angled down, as if trying to avoid being seen. I should have driven past. I should have pretended I didn't see him. But something about the way he stood there, utterly still, like he'd been waiting just for me, made me stop. He didn't thank me, didn't hesitate either, just opened the door, climbed in, and said, "South." The young man was unremarkable in most ways. He gave a name, though I would later be unable to recall it, and asked to be dropped off somewhere south. His voice was flat, his demeanor distant. There was something hollow in his tone, like the words weren't his, or he'd forgotten how to mean them. He held onto a battered backpack like it was part of him, pressing it tight against his chest. No smile, no questions, just that quiet weight between us. I tried small talk, got nowhere. So I focused on the road, pretending the silence wasn't crawling under my skin. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed his boots, caked in something, not the kind from hiking trails, but something darker, more ominous. His jeans were stained with what looked like more than just dirt. Dark patterns near the knees and thighs that suggested something far more sinister. "Rough day?" I asked. He said nothing. I told myself maybe he was just having a bad night, or maybe he didn't trust strangers. But something about the air in the car felt altered. He wasn't just quiet. He was calculating, watching, waiting. We came up on flashing lights ahead, 2 patrol cars straddled the road, an officer walking toward us with a flashlight and clipboard. That's when I felt it, him stiffening beside me. Not nervous, tense, like a wire pulled tight. "ID?" the officer asked. I handed mine over, as I did. When asked his name, he gave a different one than he had told me, a detail that immediately set alarm bells ringing. The officer looked at him a second longer than I liked, then handed our IDs back. And then came the words I'll never forget. Bodies had been unfound. The atmosphere in the car transformed instantly. I didn't ask questions, just drove. Faster. He pulled out his phone. I could see the glow against his face. A message popped up. He read it, then turned to me. His entire energy shifted. Good. Eyes sharp now. Voice not flat, but cutting. "Pull over," he said. "Now." He demanded to be let out of the car immediately, becoming increasingly aggressive. I did what he asked. I had no other choice. He stepped out, vanished into the darkness, and I sat there, gripping the wheel with fingers numb and trembling. By the time I reported the encounter, it was too late. There were no bodies, no roadblock, no record, nothing. The police seemed to have no record of any bodies, no investigation, nothing. It was as if the entire encounter had been a fever dream. All I had was a patch of dirt on the seat. And that feeling, the one you get when you know something found you and let you live. I returned to that stretch of road a few days later, parked my car, walked the shoulder. No footprints, no torn clothing, just trees whispering secrets to one another. I called the station again. The officer I spoke to claimed they hadn't set up any roadblocks in that area for months. "What about the bodies?" I asked. "What bodies?" he replied. I asked around town, even checked the newspaper archives at the library. There was nothing, no reports, no names, no missing persons matching the hitchhiker's description. It was as though he'd never existed, except I could still feel the way the air had changed when he was near. The sense that I was sitting next to something unhuman, wearing a human shell. At home, I began to notice small things. Shadows in the hallway, my dog barking at corners, my bedroom light flickering for no reason. Rationally, I blamed stress, but in my gut, I knew I had brought something back. The only proof, a patch of dirt left on the passenger seat of the car. I cleaned it. It came back. I traded the car, but it wasn't just the vehicle anymore. The memories lingered in my home, in my dreams, in the pit of my stomach. Friends noticed I was more withdrawn. One night, a buddy crashed on my couch and woke up screaming. He said he'd seen someone standing at the foot of the bed. A man in a hoodie, eyes hollow. I stopped sleeping well. I heard footsteps on the stairs when no one else was home. A faint sound of breathing from the back seat when I drove alone. This is more than just a story of a strange hitchhiker. It's a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators often look the most ordinary. The thing is, whatever he was, he wanted to be seen. Just once. Just long enough to crawl into my life and never leave. There are legends in these mountains. Some wear fur, some wear skin. Others wear the face of someone you'd help without thinking twice. He never told me who I was, but that night I gave him a ride. And every night since, he's taken a little more of me. In the Appalachian Mountains, darkness takes many forms, and sometimes it hitches a ride right beside you. Some encounters are best left on the side of the road. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Even now, every time I drive past a figure on the shoulder, I stare straight ahead. I don't stop. I don't look. Because some passengers never leave? Story number 11. They didn't leave claw marks or glowing eyes, just a woman's hand reaching for my baby's face. I thought the mountains would bring us peace, but something out there was watching and waiting. The gun pointed at us wasn't ours anymore. When we found the footprints around our tent, we thought it was just a warning, until we saw what was missing. Not all predators crawl on 4 legs. Some ask about your baby's sleep before they try to steal her. I've always trusted the forest. There's a truth in the way it moves, honest, can't, unbothered by the noise of the world. My husband Tom and I were drawn to it like some people are drawn to church. It's where we fell in love. It's where I gave birth to courage, learned to embrace storms instead of hiding from them. When our daughter Mia turned 1, we knew we wanted her to know this part of us. We didn't want to raise her in fear of people, of places, of things she couldn't control. That's why we chose the narrow Glen Trail, a route tucked deep in the southern range, not marked, not friendly, and absolutely not designed for families. But it was beautiful. We hiked for 3 days. The trail narrowed, trees grew denser, and the farther we went, the more alone we felt. I liked it. Claire and her husband had always been passionate hikers, lovers of the raw, unforgiving contact with nature that feels simultaneously threatening and purifying. Tom carried Mia in a front carrier. I kept the gear. Every step felt like we were reclaiming our rhythm. We passed 2 other hiking parties. The first waved and moved on quickly. The second didn't. A woman with curly red hair and a dirty straw hat, and a man who was tall, skinny, with a scruffy beard, and eyes that seemed perpetually on edge. Something about them didn't sit right. "They're probably just locals," Tom said. But I'd grown used to reading people in seconds. The woman asked how old Mia was. The man asked if we were sleeping in tents or cabins. She tried to touch Mia's cheek, and I pulled away, masking it as if I was adjusting the baby carrier. The conversation lasted barely 3 minutes, but it followed us the rest of the day. That night, we pitched our tent near a quiet ridge covered in moss and pine needles. No signs of wildlife, just perfect quiet. Tom built a small fire. I fed Mia, sang to her, and laid her down between us. It was one of those moments where everything seems normal, but something feels fundamentally wrong. Around 3 a.m., I awoke to a distant sound, like breathing, or leaves shifting in a rhythm that wasn't ours. I didn't move. My fingers brushed Tom's arm. He stirred, but didn't wake. I kept my eyes open until the sky started to lighten. When we stepped out of the tent, the forest greeted us like it always had, serene, majestic, eternal. But something on the ground shattered that peace. The ground was covered in human footprints, multiple sets that had walked around their campsite during the night. They circled the tent, came close to the fire pit. Some had even stopped inches from where Mia slept, but it wasn't the footprints that made me drop to my knees. It was what was missing. Mia's bottle, her bright orange spoon, her silicone owl plate, gone. Our food bags were untouched, our gear intact. But her things, they were taken deliberately. The food remained untouched, but these specific items had been deliberately taken. Tom's face was pale. We're being watched. I didn't need him to say it. I already knew. Claire was convinced it had been the couple they had encountered, a theory that filled her with a primal maternal terror. We had two options: hike back to the ranger station or wait it out another night and leave at first light. Tom argued we were too deep in. Daylight was our best defense. I agreed reluctantly. We set no fire that night. Instead, we kept vigil. Tom watched first. I held Mia, too afraid to put her down, too aware of every shifting leaf and creaking branch. When it was my turn, Tom collapsed into a shallow sleep. I sat near the tent's opening, clutching a hiking pole in one hand and a dull knife in the other. Then I saw her, not walking, not creeping, just standing. Claire woke her husband, claiming someone was standing in a thick patch of vegetation just beyond their firelight. He jumped up, flashlight in hand, but when he turned it on, nothing. No footsteps, no movement. But I know what I saw. I was still shaking when I crawled back into the tent. Mia stirred against me. Then came the worst moment of my life. The zipper slid, one tooth at a time. And then she was inside. The woman from earlier was suddenly in their tent, pointing their own gun at them. Her face was calm, even as her eyes darted. Behind her, the man appeared, crawling halfway through the flap, whispering something I didn't catch. My body moved before I could think. I grabbed the tin cup near the embers outside, scooped hot ash and flung it right into her face. She screamed and dropped the gun. Tom tackled the man as I scooped Mia into my chest. We didn't wait to see if they were chasing. We ran all night. No shoes, no map, just instinct. We reached the ranger station at dawn. Bloody feet, broken voices, empty expressions. They gave us water, called police, filed a report, but nothing happened. No charges, no evidence. Initially, the case was closed due to lack of evidence. Weeks passed. We moved back to the city. Tom installed 3 locks on every door. I couldn't sleep without checking on me every hour. Then came the call. Another family. Same trail, same woman, same man. They'd tried again. Another couple had reported a similar incident on the same trail with descriptions matching the same pair. This wasn't random. This was a hunt, and we were never supposed to make it out. Story number 12. You think you're alone in the woods until you realize you're being watched, not by wildlife, but by something much worse. The road was supposed to be my escape. It became the beginning of a manhunt. A woman, a van, a cat, and 3 strangers who never blinked. When your instincts scream before anything happens, listen. That scream saved my life. They didn't knock. They didn't yell. They just opened fire, and I was already running. I have always found comfort in isolation. Not the absence of people, but the presence of silence. The kind of silence you only get on narrow, tree-lined roads that weave through the Appalachian Mountains. I'd driven those roads half a dozen times, never with fear. Just me and the open path ahead. This time, though, I wasn't alone. My cat, Miley, accompanied me, making this a multi-day adventure through landscapes that promised both beauty and isolation. That phrase echoed in my head later like a curse. The plan was simple. Take the back roads from New England south, camp in the more secluded areas, and enjoy the fading autumn light. I'd picked a perfect spot. An old dirt road barely used since a new route was constructed promised minimal human contact. I backed my van into a clearing nestled behind some firs, unpacked just the essentials, and let Miley stretch out on the dashboard. The first night, peaceful. The second, even better. I journaled. I read. I watched the wind carry gold leaves across the gravel like little travelers in their own right. But something felt different by the third day. It wasn't anything I could name, just a shift, subtle like the drop in temperature before a storm. Her cat, Miley, became restless, meowing repeatedly, creating an atmosphere of unease. I figured maybe a raccoon was lurking nearby, or that she missed the warmth of home. But the way she kept fixating on the road, it unnerved me. That's when I heard the car. Not passing, not speeding, just slowing. 3 men inside, staring directly at her with an intensity that sent immediate chills down her spine. Their vehicle didn't belong out here. Too clean, too quiet, too deliberate. The moment our eyes met, I knew. Something inside her knew instantly and absolutely that she was in danger. That knowledge wasn't logic. It was instinct. Deep, primal, ancient. The same kind that makes animals bolt before the ground shakes. Without hesitation, she grabbed her backpack, locked the van, and grabbed Miley. Hiding in the surrounding vegetation, the underbrush was thick. I crouched beneath pine branches, trying to quiet Miley, who was now trembling in my arms. I held her tight, pressing her small body against my chest so she couldn't make a sound. What's that? Not 2 minutes later, the van returned. The 3 men got out, calmly, rummaging through her belongings. One peeked inside the van, talking to the others. Another began searching the area, trying to spot her hiding place. Their voices were casual. No urgency, no panic. That was the worst part. It wasn't a crime of desperation. They'd done this before. Then came the sound that would mark the turning point. A bullet struck her van's window as one of the men attempted to unlock the door. They weren't just thieves. They were hunting. I didn't wait. I ran, barefoot, heart pounding, still clutching Miley. Her phone was dead. Something she hadn't realized until she tried to call for help. Branches slashed across my skin. Rocks jabbed my soles. But none of it mattered. The only thing I could hear was my blood, rushing, roaring, screaming at me to keep moving. The forest blurred. I didn't have a direction, just the memory of a gas station I'd passed maybe half an hour before. That became my lifeline. Behind me, I heard movement. Maybe Animals. Maybe not. Every step became a prayer. The gas station appeared empty, with a lone man behind the counter. Every doubt crossed her mind. Was he also a threat? Would he hand her over to the men pursuing her? I pushed the door open, and the man looked up. Middle-aged, weathered face. He saw something in my eyes. Maybe terror. Maybe desperation. And didn't ask questions. He immediately called the police and told her to hide in the storage room. From there, I could hear the truck pulling up. They'd followed me. When the pursuing men arrived, he confronted them, armed and determined. I still don't know what he said, but I remember his voice. Unwavering, protective. He didn't owe me anything, yet he stood between me and them like I was his own daughter. The police arrived shortly after, escorting her back to her van to collect her belongings and booking her a hotel room with the guard stationed outside. I don't remember much of that night, just pieces. Blue lights flashing through trees, officers speaking gently, trying not to startle me, wrapping a blanket around me like I was made of glass. 2 days later, I returned home with my parents. I'd left chasing peace. I came back carrying something darker. Miley, now a changed cat, constantly hiding from loud noises, traumatized by their experience. She used to greet strangers. Now, she hides under the couch if someone knocks. Me? I haven't taken another solo trip since. They didn't steal anything from my van, but they took something far more important, my sense of safety, my ability to trust the road. This is more than just a story of a narrow escape. It's a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators often hide in plain sight. I had always thought of the Appalachian wilderness as sacred. Wild, yes, but pure. That night changed that forever. Some journeys change you forever. Some roads lead to adventure, while others lead to a confrontation with the darkest side of human nature. And that's what I want to tell you, because monsters don't always hide under beds. Sometimes they slow their van down, look you in the eye, and wait. And in the Appalachian wilderness, the line between traveler and prey is often razor thin.